Hello, welcome back to my Nature Book Review series. This is episode 3 of books I would recommend on natural history, and in this episode I'm going to be talking about Vanished Giants. So Vanished Giants was a book I was very much excited for leading up to its release, and the main reason because of that is because, to the best of my knowledge, this is the only book that talks about all the large megafauna of the ice ages across all the continents. The missing links, of course, focused only on those large animals of Eurasia. I wasn't too familiar with the author of this book going into it, Professor Anthony J. Stewart. He's a lecturer at Durham University, apparently, but he was also a consultant for the 2013 BBC miniseries Ice Age Giants that was presented by Professor Alice Roberts, which I was equally hyped for at the time. But even though I'm a fan of Alice Roberts and the CGI looked pretty neat, I was actually left pretty cold by Ice Age Giants, and the main reason because of that is because the pacing of the thing was as glacial as the time period itself. But I doubt that the faults of that series were to do with Anthony Stewart, so I was still really hyped going into this book. Having read it, I can say that if you're a fan of the Ice Ages and a fan of reading about prehistoric animals, I would really recommend this book. And if you're a scholar of paleontology or natural sciences of any kind, I would almost go as far to saying that this is a must read. If, however, you're kind of new to nature reading, I would probably actually first recommend that you read Europe and the Missing Links, because there is a couple of things in this book that might not be to everybody's taste, but I will get into them. So in this book we essentially go from continent to continent, and we're presented with all the large animals that existed on those continents up until the end of the last ice age. But just before then we have a couple of chapters on previous extinction events. There's been 5 major extinction events in Earth's history, and in these early chapters we're presented with one of the most hotly debated topics in paleontology at the moment. Were humans responsible for the extinction of some of these large animals at the end of the last ice age? And we're shown a few different hypotheses that are still kind of floating around. So one is climate change, another is that yes, humans were responsible, but there's also other hypotheses such as asteroid impact and disease. But you don't actually need to be an expert on paleontology to at least see the logic why a lot of people think that humans are responsible for a lot of these extinctions, because a lot of them happened very suddenly after humans colonized those areas. So just to give you a quick background of the human spread around the world, humans evolved in Africa between 200 and 300,000 years ago. Then some of us left for good about 70,000 years ago, and we spreaded mostly east. By about 50,000 years ago, we made it to Australia, which was followed by a wave of extinction of the large mammalian marsupials that once existed there. And roughly around the same time, man also entered Europe, and again, some large animals began to go extinct around that time. Nothing much then happened for a few thousand years, but then some humans went north, and then went to North America and South America via the land bridge between Russia and Alaska, of course, because during the ice ages sea levels were a lot lower. And again, we see many large animals become extinct very shortly afterwards. And the same is also true to an extent for Madagascar and certainly New Zealand, when people first arrived there about 800 years ago. But even though it's very easy to point the finger at humans, Vanished Giants doesn't explicitly say that humans are solely responsible, because it's very difficult to prove exactly how a species became extinct if we're talking about something that happened tens of thousands of years ago. So you really get a sense from this book really early on that this book is going to be very objective, straight down the middle, and very thorough. It'd be very easy for Anthony just to point the finger straight at humans, but he knows that there's a lot more data that needs to be collected before we can firmly say what caused a lot of these extinctions. And so I think that any new information that will be gathered in the years ahead will probably add to this book rather than contradict it. So I think that this book will probably age really well and won't age really badly like Humans Who Went Extinct and After the Dinosaurs, which are really outdated now since new things have been discovered. So after those first few chapters, we then go from continent to continent and learn about, as I said, all the interesting animals that once existed there. So Europe, as you probably know from my last couple of reviews, that was home of the woolly mammoth and the woolly rhino, cave lions, saber-toothed tigers for a while, giant deer, cave bears, and another couple of species of rhino during the interglacial periods. North America, for much of the ice ages, were the home of the mastodon, the saber-toothed tigers, and a few species of ground sloths. South America was the home of the gomphotheres, elephant-like animals, glyptodonts and more ground sloths, and Sahul, which comprised of Australia and New Guinea because they were connected during the Ice Ages. That was the home of the marsupial lion, marsupial tapir and rhino, as well as a whole host of kangaroos. And at the start of each chapter, we see silhouettes of all these animals that existed. The black ones being those that have been extinct entirely, and the grey ones are megafauna that still exist around us. So yeah, pretty much all the passages are well written, and much like the missing links, really draw their data from what we know of their bones, mummified corpses, and of cave art. And you'll be surprised just how much we can learn about these animals. Some of these animals modern scientists obviously never saw in real life, but we know quite a bit about them by now because of the isotopes that they left behind in their fossilized bones and dung. And it was really quite interesting. Again, even though I have read quite extensively now books about natural history, I was still learning a lot of new things. And it was just great discovering all these things about all these extinct animals. And again, like I say in every review, every time you learn something new about a species, every time you learn something interesting, you can't help but visualize those animals yourself and start to realize just how wonderful this planet once was when it was all pristine and these animals walked around. But the first thing about this book that might not be to everybody's taste, reading this, I can see that Anthony's really tried to make it more sort of public friendly in his way of writing, but I don't think he succeeds fully, because the way that this book is written is very much kind of like an essay style academic journal, which I know that he probably really didn't want to be like. There isn't some sort of humour. It's very much, I would say, a scientific book for scientists really, but even though that is the case, if you are a fan of Ice Age animals and the Ice Age period, you can still have a lot of fun reading it. So at the end of the book, he just gives us his thoughts, really sort of an overview of what he thinks led to the extinction of these species. For him, it's kind of like a mixed bag. It was probably due to human influence, but also climate change, because climate change has been really, really up and down over the last 2.5 million years. The ice ages weren't just cold throughout. There were many peaks and troughs along the way. And a lot of these changes happened very suddenly. So it does make sense why it would probably be a mix of things in the end. But as I said in the beginning, he really thinks that more data needs to be collected for us to have a true understanding of how these species became extinct. One thing he does disagree with, though, is the blitzkrieg hypothesis that was first presented by Paul Martin back in the 1960s, that humans arrived in these areas and extinction happened very, very, very rapidly. So he sort of refutes that by saying that, you know, there's evidence of humans in these areas, and then the extinction of the animals didn't start until a few thousand years later. My only problem is that he doesn't really define what the blitzkrieg hypothesis is in real time, really, because for us, if we were to land in an area, then the animals in that area wouldn't become extinct for a few thousand years. That doesn't sound like blitzkrieg at all, but that's mainly because we only live for about 70, 80 years. However, if you think that some of these islands and some of these continents were able to have animals that existed in isolation for tens of millions of years, for a lot of them to become extinct within a few thousand years, that is very, very, very rapid. So I would have liked maybe just a bit more explanation of the blitzkrieg hypothesis, even though that it probably, you know, does refer to a lot shorter time span than a few thousand years. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. The only other problem is that it is quite expensive, which is another reason why I would probably recommend you first read The Missing Links and Europe First. They will change how you see the world. Once you know more about the world and the animals that exist here, you really, really see what a wonderful place Earth is, and you really have a new drive to protect it. So yeah, if you have read it already, do let me know in the comments. Until next time, so long for now.